The restaurant had always been my sanctuary, a place where, no matter how tough life got, there was always something familiar to hold on to. I can still remember the scent of fresh bread baking in the oven and the sound of silverware clinking against plates. It was never glamorous, more like a cozy family diner, tucked in a quiet corner of the city, but to me, it was everything. I grew up here, my grandmother always at the heart of it, running the kitchen with a mix of tough love and quiet authority. She was a woman who didn't need to shout to be heard. Everyone in town knew her as the woman who made the best apple pie, the one who had a smile that could make you feel like everything would be okay, no matter what. It wasn't just the food that kept people coming back, it was her wisdom, her sense of humor, and that unspoken understanding she had with every person who walked through the door. I think I learned most of what I know about life from her, how to deal with people, how to work hard, how to forgive but never forget. But it wasn't just Grandma and me. There was always the rest of the family. Some of them had worked at the restaurant over the years, but none of them stuck around for long. My cousin Ellie, however, had always been there in some form or another. She was the one everyone turned to at family gatherings, the one who got all the attention. Loud, charming, and always talking about her dreams of owning the place one day. But as much as she talked, Ellie never actually put in the hours, never learned how to properly run things. She'd show up occasionally, sure, but only when it was convenient. Yet, somehow, everyone, including my grandmother, seemed to think Ellie was destined for something big. I never minded it at first. Ellie was family, and I understood her need for validation. But the more I saw her play at being important when it came to the restaurant, the more it grated on me. I had always been the one to handle the day-to-day grind, the waitress shifts, the late-night cleanups, the endless inventory checks. I loved it, though. It was my way of honoring Grandma, of being a part of something bigger than myself. Over time, though, the feeling that I was invisible started to creep in. Ellie was always the center of attention when it came to the family business. At gatherings, she would talk about her plans for the restaurant as though she was already in charge, tossing around ideas that she had never actually put into practice. "When I own this place," she'd say, "I'll turn it into something huge. Grandma's just waiting for me to take over." It stung, especially because deep down, I knew I was the one who had put in the hours while she sat back and dreamed, yet no one ever saw it. My grandmother, who I thought would see right through Ellie's self-promotion, didn't say much about it. She always smiled at me as if she understood what I was going through, but never actually said the words I needed to hear. Then, everything changed. I didn't expect it, not in a million years, but Grandma passed away suddenly. A heart attack, the doctor said. I didn't even get the chance to say goodbye. The loss hit me harder than I anticipated. I thought I was prepared. I knew it would happen one day. But the reality was far worse. It felt like I'd lost the one person who truly understood me. I took some time off from work to grieve, as did everyone else. The restaurant, which had always been the place I ran to, now felt empty, as if it had lost its soul. Grandma's presence lingered in every corner, but her absence was deafening. Then, a letter arrived. A lawyer's letter. It was from Grandma's estate. I remember opening it slowly, as if I could somehow delay what I feared would be bad news. But then I read the words, "You have been named the sole beneficiary of your grandmother's estate, including the property, assets, and the restaurant located at address." I had to read it 3 times before the words sank in. The restaurant. My restaurant. I never knew Grandma had left it all to me. I didn't even know she had made a will. I wasn't prepared for this, not emotionally, and certainly not practically. I had no idea how to run a full-scale restaurant, sure. I knew the ropes from working there my whole life, but actually taking over? That felt like a different world entirely. But the will was clear, and there was no mistaking it. The restaurant was mine. The rest of the family took the news. Well, not as I'd hoped. There were congratulations, of course, but I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. Everyone was polite at first, But Ellie? She didn't congratulate me. Instead, she said something that made my heart sink. Well, of course Grandma would leave it to you. She always favored you. Her words were sharp, coated in something that felt less like grief and more like entitlement. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say, no, Ellie, she didn't favor me. She just knew I was the one who cared. I was the one who actually worked here, but I bit my tongue. After all, this was family, and I didn't want to cause a scene. But deep down, I was seething. I was already starting to feel the weight of what was coming next. Ellie would fight me for this place. Of that, I was sure. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about a restaurant. This was about my legacy, my future, and the price of being invisible for so long. Ellie wasn't going to make this easy, but I wasn't about to let her walk all over me, not when everything that mattered was at stake. The wake was over, and with it came the realization that Grandma was really gone. The house, which had once been filled with so much warmth and love, now felt cold and hollow. Family members were quietly gathering their things, sharing condolences in muted voices, but no one seemed to know what to say. I stood by the door, holding a plate of food I hadn't touched. My hands were still trembling, not from grief anymore, but from the weight of what had just happened. I hadn't expected the will to be read so soon. The lawyer called me that morning, requesting my presence for the reading. No one else was there, just me and him, sitting in the living room that Grandma had spent countless hours in, flipping through papers and explaining the contents of a document I never knew existed. The lawyer was kind enough to give me space to process it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more coming. The restaurant? I hadn't even thought of it at that moment, so lost in the fog of grief. But now, standing at the doorway of Grandma's old house, the weight of the decision ahead of me started to press down. I took a deep breath and stepped back into the family gathering. I wasn't ready to deal with Ellie yet, but I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. She was already sitting in the corner of the room, an air of confidence surrounding her, as if the whole place belonged to her already. "Hey!" I heard Ellie's voice behind me. I didn't have to turn around to know what was coming. Her tone was sweet, almost too sweet. "I've been meaning to talk to you." I turned to face her, offering a polite smile that I didn't really feel. "What's up?" She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Her eyes locked onto mine, full of that same smugness I'd always known. "You know," she started, folding her arms, "Grandma always said I'd be the one to take over the restaurant one day." I blinked, confused. Where was she going with this? "Ellie, Grandma left the restaurant to me. It's in the will." Her laugh was forced, almost too loud. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm sure you've misunderstood. Grandma always favored me. She even told me multiple times that I was the one she trusted with it. So I've been thinking about it, and I'm sure we can work something out. I mean, you're family, right?" I stared at her, trying to wrap my mind around what she was saying. She couldn't be serious. I knew the will, I had the papers, and they were clear. But there was Ellie, looking at me like she had the upper hand, like this was all part of some big family plan I wasn't clued into. "Ellie," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "Grandma left the restaurant to me. She didn't say anything about splitting it or giving anyone else a say. It's all in writing." She leaned in closer, the sickly sweet smile still plastered on her face. "You know, I was the one who spent more time with Grandma, especially toward the end. I'm not sure what she was thinking leaving you in charge, but maybe it's for the best if we share it. After all, you've got a lot going on, a lot of stress." I could feel my hands curling into fists at my sides. "Ellie, I don't know where you're getting this from, but I'm not going to let you take what's mine. Grandma's will is clear, and I'm not sharing." Her eyes narrowed, the sweetness in her voice evaporating as she dropped the pretense. "You know, this isn't going to be as easy as you think. I'm not going to just let you run things without at least trying to get my fair share." She stepped back, tossing her hair over her shoulder. "I'll be talking to the lawyer, and if we have to, we'll go to court. Don't think I won't fight for what's mine." I froze. I'd expected Ellie to cause a scene, to sulk, maybe even try to manipulate other family members into taking her side. But hearing her talk about going to court made my stomach drop. This wasn't just about who got the restaurant. It was about the legacy Grandma had left behind, the one she trusted me to protect. "Ellie, I'm not the one you need to worry about," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "You're not getting anything. This is mine now. If you want to fight, fine, but I won't back down." Her lips curled into a tight smile. "We'll see about that." And just like that, the air in the room shifted. I could feel the tension building, the weight of everything that was about to happen. I hadn't wanted to fight with my family, but Ellie wasn't going to give me a choice. She was pushing me into a corner, and I wasn't going to let her take what was rightfully mine. Not now, not ever. I walked away, the sound of her laughter following me out the door. As I stepped into the cool evening air, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to let her win, not this time. I would protect Grandma's restaurant, no matter what it took. The days after that conversation with Ellie were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and sleepless nights. The restaurant, which had always been a place of comfort, now felt like a battleground. Ellie's words echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking through a minefield. She didn't give up after the will reading. No, Ellie wasn't that kind of person. Instead, she found another way to make her presence known. At first, it was subtle. She showed up at the restaurant more often, helping with small tasks that were clearly beneath her. She'd swipe a rag and wipe down the tables for a few minutes, her arms folded in a show of ownership. Every time I caught her, I had to bite my tongue. She wasn't doing this out of love for the restaurant. She was doing it to stake her claim. "Just making sure the place stays in good shape for when I take over," she'd joke, a knowing look in her eyes. But it wasn't just her passive-aggressive cleaning sprees. Ellie started making calls to some of the regulars, telling them how she was going to take charge of the place. I overheard her on the phone one day, bragging to an old customer, "Grandma always said I had the real vision. I'll be turning this place into something big, just wait." I felt my stomach churn each time I heard her words. She was trying to erode my control over the place bit by bit, like a slow drip of poison. The real blow came a week later. I was in the kitchen, working on a batch of pie crusts, when one of the waitstaff came in, looking flustered. Hey, I think you should know something," she said, her voice low. "What is it?" I wiped my hands on my apron, uneasy at the expression on her face. "Ellie, she's telling people she's the co-owner now," the waitress said, eyes darting to the door. "She even said you don't know how to manage this place and that she's going to help you out." My mind raced. Ellie had always been overconfident, but now she was trying to publicly claim what was mine. It wasn't just a matter of a few offhand comments anymore. It was a deliberate power grab. She'd taken her campaign into the restaurant itself, trying to undermine my authority and make people question my leadership. I tried to remain calm, but a cold fury began to bubble inside of me. She had crossed a line. "Is that all?" I asked, already knowing it wasn't. The look on the waitress's face told me everything I needed to know. "Well, she's been talking to the suppliers too," the waitress continued. "She called up John at the produce stand and asked him to start giving her invoices directly, like she's the one in charge of the budget." That was it. I was done waiting. I couldn't let Ellie take control of the restaurant by force, or by playing the part of the helpful cousin who just so happened to have an opinion on everything. I needed to act. The next day, I called the lawyer. I needed to be sure about my rights. The will had made things clear, but with Ellie spreading lies and asserting her ownership, I needed to make sure there was no question about it. I asked the lawyer to draft a letter, something that would make it clear to Ellie that the restaurant was legally mine. I knew she wouldn't take it well, but I had to do something. A few days later, I got the letter in the mail. It was formal, straightforward, and to the point. "Please be advised that as per the will of your late grandmother, the ownership of the restaurant at address is solely vested in your name, and no one else has any legal claim to the business or property. Any further interference with the operation of the business will be viewed as a violation of the will's terms. I knew it wasn't going to be enough to scare her off, but it was a start. At least I had something concrete on paper now. When I handed the letter to Ellie, her face twisted into that familiar sneer of hers. She didn't even bother pretending to be polite. "What's this?" she asked, looking at the letter like it was a fly in her soup. "It's from the lawyer," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's to clarify things, Ellie. This place is mine. There's no discussion, no ownership shares for you." She didn't say anything at first. I saw her eyes flicker with something a mixture of anger and disbelief. But then she threw her head back and laughed as if she had just heard a joke. "Cute, really cute, but this isn't over. I'm not just going to walk away because you handed me some paper." Her voice dropped an octave, the sweetness gone. "If you think I'm going to let you take all the glory, think again. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth." "Ellie, this is the truth," I said, holding my ground. "Your grandmother left me this place. You don't have a claim. It's over." Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "You've made a big mistake. Don't think I won't take this to court." She stormed out, but not before making a show of slamming the door behind her. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I thought the letter would be enough. But Ellie wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The very next day, I walked into the restaurant to find a scene unfolding in the dining room. Ellie had brought her supporters, some of the family members who always thought I was too soft and was talking to the staff like she owned the place. One of the cooks was already arguing with her, trying to stand up for me, but Ellie was having none of it. "This isn't just a family business, people. This is my family business," she said loudly, enough for the whole room to hear. "I've been in the kitchen with Grandma since I was a kid. I'm the one who knows what's best for this place." The staff was looking at each other, unsure of what to do. I walked in just in time to hear the tail end of Ellie's tirade. "Ellie, I told you already, this is my restaurant," I said, my voice firm, but my heart racing. "Get out, now!" She turned to me slowly, a dangerous smirk creeping onto her face. "Make me." And just like that, I realized what kind of fight I was in. Ellie wasn't going to stop until she had what she wanted. The next few days were a blur of tension. Ellie continued to show up, causing drama wherever she could. She started making plans for renovations, telling customers about her vision for the restaurant, and undermining me in front of the staff. The line between family and business was blurring, and it was becoming harder to keep my cool. But I couldn't back down, not now. The restaurant was everything Grandma had built, and I wasn't about to let Ellie destroy it, or me, without a fight. I wasn't the one who had started this war, but I was damn sure going to finish it. The tension had reached a breaking point. I'd been walking on eggshells for weeks, trying to keep the restaurant running, managing the staff, and dealing with Ellie's constant attempts to control everything. But I could feel the walls closing in. The once welcoming environment of Grandma's restaurant had become a battleground. The weight of it all was wearing me down, and it was clear that Ellie wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted. I had been patient, but now, after the endless undermining, the lies, the manipulation, I couldn't take it anymore. It was time for me to make a stand. No more playing nice, no more letting her push me around. The final straw came one evening when I walked into the restaurant after a long day of meetings with suppliers. Ellie had decided it was the perfect time to redecorate. The place was a mess, chairs moved around, pictures taken down, and new items strewn about that I'd never seen before. "Ellie," I said, my voice low and cold, "what the hell is going on here?" She looked up from behind the counter, a smug grin plastered on her face. "I'm just making some improvements, don't you think? This place could really use a facelift. Grandma was stuck in the past. We need to move forward." I took a deep breath, forcing my hands not to ball into fists. The nerve of her, the absolute nerve. "You're making improvements without my permission?" I could feel my pulse quickening. "You're not the owner, Ellie. You never were, and you never will be." Her grin only widened. "Oh, but I am. The minute Grandma passed, this place should have been mine. I know it, and you know it. All of this little charade you're putting on, it's not going to work." I walked closer, fighting the rage that surged through me. "You don't get to just decide this is yours because you think you deserve it. This restaurant is mine. It was left to me, and I'm going to prove it." Ellie scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "You think you can scare me with some legal papers? That's cute. You really think Grandma left you everything just like that? You must be delusional. I've got family on my side, people who actually care about me." I took a steadying breath, my mind racing. This was it. There was no turning back now. If I didn't stand my ground here, she'd walk all over me forever. And that wasn't going to happen. Not while I had the will. I pulled the envelope from my bag and slammed it down onto the counter. The sound was louder than I expected, but it felt good, like the release of all the frustration and anxiety I'd been carrying for weeks. Ellie stared at it for a moment and then looked back at me, her brow furrowing. "What's that supposed to be?" I didn't say anything. Instead, I reached for the papers and began reading aloud, my voice calm but firm, even though inside I was shaking with adrenaline. "As per the will of Grandma's full name, it is hereby stated that the restaurant located at address is to be solely transferred to your full name, effective immediately upon her death. There are no conditions or stipulations for co-ownership or division of the property." I glanced up to see her face redden. "It's all here, Ellie. You don't have a leg to stand on." Her expression flickered. For a brief moment, there was doubt in her eyes. But then, like a switch had been flipped, her expression hardened, and she sneered. "You really think a piece of paper is going to stop me? You think this is over?" Her voice was trembling now, but there was no mistaking the anger behind her words. She stepped toward me, and for a second, I thought she might actually lunge at me. The air between us was thick with resentment and unresolved tension. I didn't flinch. Instead, I stood tall, looking her square in the eyes. "Yes, I do think this is over, and I'm done letting you bully me and try to take what's mine." She opened her mouth to say something, probably a sharp retort, but before she could speak, I held up my hand. "But you're not just going to walk out of here without facing the consequences, Ellie." I gave her a hard look, feeling a surge of strength I hadn't known I had. "You've undermined me for weeks. You've gone behind my back, spread lies, and tried to make people believe you had some kind of claim here. But you don't." The silence that followed was suffocating. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the back and the faint sound of cars driving by outside. It was like the whole restaurant held its breath. "I'm not going to let you ruin what Grandma built," I said, more quietly now. "She trusted me, and I'm not going to let you disrespect her memory by trying to tear this place down for your own gain." Ellie's lip curled into a sneer, but there was a flicker of uncertainty behind her eyes. The walls she'd built up were cracking, just a little. "Fine," she said, her voice sharp. "You think you've won? Fine, but don't think for a second that this is over. You've got more enemies than you realize." I could feel the weight of her words, but I didn't back down. "Go ahead. I'll handle whatever comes next, because I know I'm in the right." Ellie's eyes burned with anger, but she didn't say anything else. She turned, shoulders stiff, and marched out of the restaurant, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. The door swung shut behind her with a final, satisfying thud. For a moment, I just stood there, listening to the quiet. I hadn't expected it to feel like this calm, almost surreal. The storm had passed, and I had come out on top. The restaurant was mine, and Ellie knew it. I had faced her down, I had taken control, and I wasn't going to let her or anyone else take that from me. The next few weeks were quieter. Ellie didn't return to the restaurant, though I knew that wouldn't be the last I'd hear from her. But for now, there was peace. I'd learned something important that day, that I was capable of standing up for myself, that I could be both kind and fierce, and that no one, not even family, could take what was rightfully mine without a fight. And as I looked around the restaurant, the place Grandma had built, I knew I had made the right choice. I would protect it, her legacy, with everything I had. The weeks after Ellie stormed out of the restaurant were the most peaceful I'd experienced in months. I spent my days focusing on what mattered: the business, the staff, and honoring Grandma's memory. The tension had lifted, but there was still an uneasy calm hanging in the air. Ellie didn't show her face again, but I knew better than to think she'd just walk away without a fight. She wasn't the type of person to give up easily. It wasn't long before I got the call from the lawyer. He had been handling the legalities, and Ellie had followed through on her threats filing for a contested probate. She was trying to take the matter to court, arguing that Grandma had made promises to her, that I had manipulated the situation somehow, that she was the real heir. I was prepared for this, but hearing it officially in black and white made my stomach churn. I'd expected her to make a move, but the idea of court battles, legal fees, and dragging out the conflict made me feel a sense of dread I couldn't shake. Still, I knew there was no turning back now. I had to face this head on, for Grandma's sake, for the restaurant. The lawyer assured me that the will was airtight. Grandma had been clear and specific about her wishes, and there was no room for doubt. "I've seen her will, and it's not in your cousin's favor," the lawyer told me. "You have a strong case." That was reassuring, but there was still the matter of Ellie's persistence. She had always been the type to believe that things owed her. I had to admit, I didn't quite know how far she'd go to try to tear this apart. As the days passed, the restaurant began to feel more like mine than it ever had before. I threw myself into the business, reorganizing things, updating the menu, and putting my own stamp on the place while still keeping the spirit of Grandma alive. The staff supported me fully, and our regular customers were loyal. I had always known they loved the food, but now I realized they loved the feeling of being part of something real, something that stood for more than just a business. This restaurant was about community, about family, and about the memories we shared. And that was something no one, not even Ellie, could take away. But the legal battle loomed in the background. The lawyer filed the necessary paperwork, and we prepared for the court hearing. Each day, I wrestled with the doubt that crept in at the edges of my mind. Would I really have to go through all of this? Could I truly defend Grandma's will against Ellie's accusations? I wasn't just fighting for a restaurant. I was fighting for my own dignity, for the legacy my grandmother had entrusted to me. Then came the day of the court hearing. I was nervous, but the more I sat there in the quiet, sterile courtroom, the more I realized how much I had grown. This wasn't just about Ellie and me anymore. It was about standing up for myself, for my grandmother, for everything I had worked for. The hearing was tense. Ellie was there, of course, looking more determined than ever, her usual confidence replaced with something more bitter. Her lawyer argued her case, claiming that Grandma had favored her, that she had always been promised the restaurant. But I didn't flinch. I knew my truth, and I had the papers to prove it. When my lawyer stood up to present the will, the room fell silent. He spoke clearly and confidently, presenting the documents that made it clear that the restaurant had always been meant for me. The judge asked a few questions, but there was no real argument. Ellie's case crumbled, and the reality of the situation settled in. She had nothing but her word against the legal documents in front of her. The judge ruled in my favor, making the decision official. The restaurant was mine, and there was nothing Ellie could do about it. I remember walking out of that courtroom, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. I wasn't just relieved. I was proud. Proud of the way I had handled things, proud of standing my ground when everything felt like it was slipping away. The aftermath wasn't as dramatic as I thought it would be. Ellie didn't return to the restaurant after the ruling, and though I knew she was upset, I wasn't about to lose sleep over it. The family dynamics were strained, but over time, things began to settle. The rest of the family saw that I had done what I needed to do to protect Grandma's legacy. Slowly, they began to understand. I focused on the restaurant. I kept it running the way Grandma would have wanted, but now it was mine to shape, to build on, to grow. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I was ready for it. Ellie never came back, and eventually, I stopped hearing from her. The few times we did cross paths at family gatherings or brief interactions, it was clear she had given up on trying to take the restaurant from me. There was no fight left in her. I think deep down, she knew she had lost. But that didn't matter anymore. I had won. Not just the restaurant, but my own sense of worth, my place in the family, and my ability to stand up for what I believed in. I had proven that I was strong enough to fight for what was rightfully mine. As the months passed, the restaurant became more than just a family business. It became a symbol of everything I had overcome. It became a place where people came not just for the food, but for the warmth, the familiarity, and the story behind it. I knew that Grandma would be proud, and that, more than anything else, was what kept me going. There was peace now. Ellie was gone from my life, and the restaurant was in my hands. It was time to build something new, something that honored my grandmother's legacy, but that also carried my own mark on it. I wasn't just the granddaughter anymore. I was the owner, the boss, the one in charge, and I was ready for whatever came next.